students tend to feel, why should I learn this? I don't need this for engineering. And then come to find out many years later, especially from hearing people with experience like you, that, wow, that is very important. And in some cases, many cases, even more important than some of the hard skills that were learned in some of the hands-on classes. So that's great to hear.
Totally. Let's talk differential equations if we could. I love that class, but here's how that applies today. I haven't thought about this in probably 20 years, but I'm glad I took that class twice, albeit, because of the multiple variables when it comes to automation solutions, right? The multiple variables that we have to keep in mind, from how do I grip a part or how do I remove a material, all the tools that have to talk to each other, what somebody has to input into the machine, what can go wrong. I'm just scratching the surface, and all the variables you have to keep in mind in this equation called, here's my problem statement, identify all those variables to come up with that solution. That's diffy Q. So you don't ask me to solve a differential equation today, right? It'd be a different type of equation.
Well, I guess considering all of those variables, companies that have been in business, they have seen all of these variables on their shop floor. And when you talk to them, you must hear reports from them, at least as what they consider to be some of the most pressing challenges that they have as they've evaluated their day-to-day business. They've seen the working parameters. What would you say are some of the main obstacles that companies tell you they are facing most significantly in recent years?
Certainly. Definitely labor shortage, labor challenges, the skills gap. Everybody talks about that. And definitely companies are saying, hey, we have a need here. We're not able to produce as much, especially the last couple of years, right? So there was the COVID, there was the pandemic, there was the pandemic effect. We're kind of over that. We call it the hangover in the industry in terms of a lot of automation trying to go in at once because there was such a shortage, and people are still talking about that shortage, that skills gap that people have been talking about, and the labor shortage that we've been talking about probably since 2003, I think, when I first started to see those papers come out saying, hey, 2018, 2020, there's going to be a shortage in labor just based on demographics alone of our retiring and aging population, right? So then pandemic happened around that time and just exasperated all of it. So labor shortage for sure. We've known this was coming. Any labor shortage or skills gap, it's not coming back due to the demographics and there's just the facts about that and the aging population and people retiring all around us. Skill sets that retire along with those people, that's going away as well. So, that's definitely the need in terms of, hey, we don't have enough labor to man the machines. For some reason, I hear this common number of 30%. Some plants maybe, there's 30% of the machines are not operating at full potential or full capacity. That's one thing. The other, I'd say newer challenges a lot of customers have today is this high mix, low volume type situation where plants that have been running for 20 years had been designed and laid out to produce 5 or 6 parts. And now companies are having to, just like for some reason with our human buying habits of wanting a brand new, different smart device or new tech every 2 years, seemingly customers want different options when it comes to valve sizes or, different doohickeys, if I use that technical term. So there's a lot of companies that we do see today where they have the labor shortage, but they also have the challenge of a high mix of parts that we have to handle, right? So that's always been a challenge in the industry of how do I solve that? But it's interestingly enough, with today's technology, there's more solutions today that didn't exist even 5 years ago to solve those challenges.
Now, that first one that you brought up, the short staffing, the lack of labor to fill the roles, I've heard that repeated a lot of times. I've heard different presentations at trade shows and many, many articles from many companies that address different ways to solve that problem, and some of them through education, partnering with colleges, things like that, which I think are great solutions. But do you notice, after you work with the companies and you've performed some of the evaluations, do you find ever any conflicting information that perhaps simply hiring more people to fill roles may not actually be the proper solution in all of those cases where what's reported to you is we simply need more engineers?
Right, absolutely. I think what I've been discovering is a lot of companies, I may engage with upper level management, executive level, and what they report up to them is, hey, labor shortages, and they've heard that over the last couple of years particularly, right? By the time I get to the plant floor, we do the evaluation. We see, hey, where do you want to automate? Great. What's your staffing for that? How often your machine's running? We're starting to find, I'd say in the last 6-8 months or so, that labor shortage isn't as impactful. Meaning, I don't think it's seemingly things might be leveling out. You could look at both the statistics in terms of unemployment rates, the number of hires that are still being requested. So the hires, the demand is still there, but we're also filling a lot of jobs. So I think historically we're at very low unemployment rates in manufacturing right now, right? So I think there's that demand, the crises experience that people were feeling the last couple of years. I'm not sure I see that as much. And in terms of that, do we just throw bodies at this? Well, I think there's ways to look at a stepped plan, so okay, problem solving 101. What's the challenge? Is it purely just bodies, or is it maybe a balance of machines that are easier for your current staff to manage, right? So now we have technology that's easier to implement, for somebody to maintain. We try to shy away in certain instances, certain applications, shy away from the words like programming. I may not need somebody to program this. I say robots and programming. People think typing on keys and somebody, from the movie Hackers or something like that, right? It's not like that at all. A lot of times it's, hey, I can pick up a tablet device and drag and drop icons and create programs like that. I can move a robot around, right? So I'm getting to the world of cobots and collaborative robots. Mm-hmm. So that's a big push for us because we do see a lot of the applications, the high mix, low volume that needs somebody to easily teach something. We have solutions for that, new sensors that fit right on there that have, that allow somebody to really be a smart teacher of an automated system. So it's not just throw bodies at the solution. Everything obviously is a case-by-case scenario. But I'm seeing less of the crises experience of the labor shortage. It's not just like the only, people were saying, hey, this is costing me, X amount of extra $100,000 because I can't even get the machines running. Mm-hmm. We're seeing less of that being factored into the justification for automation. So now we're having to rely on more of the old, I say the typical variables, which is straight away how often is this machine going to be running? What are the typical labor savings that we're going to see here? We're not getting that extra of downtime of machines not running, cost of doing business that we're seeing factored in today. They're just not seeing it. And I think there's different statistics out there today that would be pointing to that as well, in terms of our employment rates in manufacturing today.
Now, what would you say then might be the reason for which these companies are reporting this to you, this skill gap, and yet the job postings seem to be, like you said, steadying out, but for some reason there's still a perception that this is a problem and continuing to be a growing problem as we keep hearing. Do you think you know any reasons why that might still be the perception? Is there something in the workforce where people are being assigned or misassigned to the wrong jobs and therefore creating a gap in a particular area, but perhaps not company-wide?
Certainly. I can see this as almost let's see, maybe the part of the reason where there's still this perception is because even though we do have people filling roles and people who are engineers, people who are automation engineers even, they may have been in that role for maybe the last 5 years. So I think the nation's done a great job. I mean, when they get, this would be arguably a good job in training our future workforce, right? What I do see is there's a lot of different programs over the last 10 years on training our workforce around automation. Still, that we've been doing that. Yes, maybe not to the degree and pumping out tons of graduates in this field. But what we do see is companies who hire or bring on board somebody who maybe has 10 years of experience in automation, but they had experience in automation in whatever that last capacity, that role they had at that other manufacturer. Or somebody's a new automation engineer in the last 5 years, but now they're the ones who are dictated with the responsibility of deploying this huge corporate-wide automation strategy. Or maybe it's just somebody maybe it's just one plant, but you got somebody who has maybe the experience they have, albeit compared to somebody who's been doing this for 20 plus years, you can call it limited. I don't like to say it that because that's kind of negative. But you've got great engineers who are really good at figuring things out, but maybe they might start tackling problems that somebody who has a lot of the experience. It's kind of like you go to the doctor or you go to an auto mechanic and you say, hey, I hear this like ticking sound. And somebody who's super experienced can say, oh, yeah, that's this little doohickey over here. Clearly, I'm not a car guy. But they're the experts, right? They can hear exactly what's going on. Versus somebody who might be a great, mechanic, but may not with all the experience, and they could probably figure it out over time, but they may make some mistakes along the way. I think that analogy applies to a lot of the skill sets that are in the workforce today. There's that gap that retired with all of that experience. I think we may not have done as great of a job. I mean, this is kind of hard to do in general, that whole transitioning that knowledge base. Did companies invest in hiring those younger engineers for like a 5-year period to work along the experts? Probably not. Profits probably won out at that point. But we're facing that today. Hence why you might still see this skills gap, because the skills that's there probably just doesn't have all the experience that's required.
And I think it would be appropriate to give a shout out to those instructors and program developers at many of these institutions who are doing a great job of trying to tackle this problem. But that, like you just mentioned, the challenge of transferring the knowledge skill, the skills that come with experience, are very difficult to transfer in a classroom environment. So great job to all the teachers, instructors, and the students in there doing their best to work hard to fill this skills gap. But moving on to kind of maybe a little bit more of a tangible solution to the problem, you mentioned some of those things like you can hear the right noise, but understandably, I guess there's tons of different possible candidates in any facility that might be worth automating. But probably some are a little bit more appropriate to assign those engineers and the efforts of your team to tackling, especially when you're getting started with automation. Do you think you could provide any guidance from your experience on some of those initiatives that might, or in some cases might not, be the best candidates for an automation project?
Certainly. I think where a lot of, engineering or automation teams first to look at is what are the toughest problems we need to solve. It might be, where do we have the worst ergonomic issues or ergonomic, work environments for the workers, manual labor, picking up boxes, things like that, strenuous in your back, people working in hazardous environments. So there's the typical places people will look: the dull, the dirty, the dangerous, right? You always talk about the 3 Ds in automation, and starting there. I think that's still a good place to start. You're always going to want to look there. A lot of times, sometimes the hardest challenges have the highest risk in terms of deploying automation. So although you want to get those challenges on the board and start tackling those and start putting together your problem statements, your specifications for tackling that challenge, I also would recommend, especially for companies who are quote unquote newer to automation, or hey, I have 50 different CNC machines, but I only have one robot. Let's look at some of the lower hanging, easier fruit, less risks, meaning there's less part variation, or the less precise applications I need to automate. One place I guide people to look at is look at the human operations and look at what people do that doesn't require all of the, the magic that a human provides with our vision, our touch sensing, and all the precise, movements that we can do as a human. It's harder for a robot to do, right? So basic machine tending applications where somebody's just grabbing something, picking it up, putting it somewhere else, palletizing, boxes, things like that. Those are easy, low-hanging fruit. So when we look at applications, if there's guidance in terms of where do you start, there's high risk, definitely. What are my high challenges? Hey, I've got somebody who assembles something and it takes them 20 hours, to put together this large, massive part, or it takes them, 10 minutes to put together the small part. But man, we need 4 people to do this operation over a day because their hands cramp up, right? Tackle those, still get them on the board, but also make sure you're not missing on those low-hanging fruit first. Because you might have a really bad experience with this difficult application, and then that sometimes can sour upper management's perception of automation, or even your team. So I say don't shy away from the hard parts. Get them captured, get those specs going, but make sure get those easy wins first. Easy applications, simple, manual applications that are happening today.
And I suppose from maybe more of a financial perspective, those high risk probably have some of the highest return on the investment as well. So those ones, I could see those being some of the first ones that upper management might want to tackle, because they're the ones that are costing the most and are therefore going to have the highest and maybe even the quickest return on the investment. So you're
Sometimes,
saying that perhaps those are not always the ones that you want to start with.
correct. It might seem like that. It might seem like, wow, these are the hardest challenges, so let's automate that because that's tough. But a lot of times the automation required, all the sensors, all the checking, a human's able to inspect by visually, I don't know, 1,000 different things probably at once, versus I might have to have, 100 different fixtures just to do what a human does. That gets costly over time. So not just over time, it gets costly up front. So it may take a longer time to get that return on investment for complex, harder applications, harder challenges to solve. So it could be yes or no. And historically, the more challenging the problem is that you're trying to solve, the more human operations you're trying to replace with a robot. It's almost like equivalent. There's some relation. I'm not going to make a formula here, but there's some relation to the volume, the throughput. I got to make sure I'm not having a lot of high mix, low volume. If I'm making 1,000 of the same parts, then great. I'm probably going to see some return on that investment. So I'm going to say the more challenging problems that you're solving with automation, I think if you have a lot of throughput, those are going to be worthwhile. Versus, because we see all the time the request to, hey, can you do this really complex application? Well, how many parts do you do? Well, we might do maybe 10 a week. All right, that is probably not going to be running enough, or you're probably not going to get enough return on your investment because of your throughput, because you're just not selling enough of that product to get enough, of your profit that you're going to be getting back to your company. Hopefully that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that you have worked with many companies that are on a wide spectrum of companies that are brand new to automation and find this challenging to pick the right applications that are candidates for automation. And you've probably also worked with some that are a little bit more mature and they're familiar with the process. What would you say that picture actually looks like for those companies that are doing a really good job at picking the right projects? And what kind of challenges are they no longer facing because they've overcome that obstacle of how to approach projects correctly?
Sure. I think one of the major differences I see right away is the structures that at a mature company who's mature with automation, the structures they have in place, literally file structures, organizations, specifications. They have studied, mapped out their manufacturing processes. They've even mapped out this is over 10, 15, 20 years. So it took a lot of time for companies to get to the point to call themselves truly mature. And what that looks like from an automation supplier would be, hey, you want to solve that challenge? When I talk to that mature customer, they're giving me a stack of, here's our specifications, here's the cycle time, here's even the equipment that we've already proven out. We have a lab at which we're already proving out new technologies and new applications and new manufacturing processes. Right? That's what a mature company starts to look like. You could probably open up a file folder on their cloud network today, and you'd see file folder of structures and specifications of what they expect to put in place already today, and they have teams of people already looking at new technology. Now contrast that with maybe even a large manufacturer. Contrast it to both a large manufacturer or a small mom and pop shop. Large manufacturer, small mom and pop shop who doesn't have that infrastructure, the teams, or don't have, the 20, 30 years of experience. There's no file folders in place. There's no structures. They may have some automation they've deployed so far, and they might have some automation engineers that maybe have some experience, or they've hired somebody new. That's probably the first place we start to work, is just understanding their manufacturing process. It's something that we do see. It's a noticeable difference. If I ask you, Mr. Customer, hey, how many parts per hour do you have? What's the percentage of defects that you have? Can you show me images and of what bad looks like? And then, yeah, sure, let me bring that folder, let me bring that PowerPoint presentation. That's a mature customer versus somebody new. It's just new. And they say, great, let's figure that out together, right? And so that really comes on, the onus starts to come on the automation solution provider to make sure we're working right there with you to, build that structure as we go. That's one telling difference we could see between mature and not mature. And, a lot of industries are taking on that challenge and they're investing in it. And I've seen a lot of companies grow really quick inside of 2 to 3 years in growing that infrastructure, growing that knowledge base, having teams of people study their different plants, their operations, mapping that out first, understanding the problem statement first, right? What's the current state? and then starting to picture what that future state is and building infrastructure as you go. I call the analogy building a plane as you're flying because there's a crisis up at hand right now that's not coming, the labor shortage. So people have to move. You can't not, wait for, I don't know, the sunny day to come here. So kudos to a lot of people out there just moving forward, building their structures as they're going and learning as they go, and partnering with companies who have a lot of experience implementing automation.
That's some really interesting input, and I'm actually, I think we'll come back to that in just a little bit, because I do want to touch on some of the tangible first steps that a company can take, because what you're saying over a long period of time sounds like it could be quite intimidating for one of those small companies to think, oh, that's what I'm going to have to do to be successful, and that's more of a marathon, not a short sprint to reach that point of maturity. And so I do want to circle back in just a little bit so that we can cover maybe 2 or 3 of those things that a company can do starting today that gets them moving on the journey. I've always felt that taking a few first steps is probably the hardest part of the process, and not worrying about having to reach that point of maturity very quickly. Now, when you look at those engineers that are coming into those new roles, are there any pieces of advice that you would say for either students or for educational institutions that they can do to start implementing some of those experience-based factors? Are there some schools that you've seen or that you've worked with that have done a better job of incorporating the experience-based education and transitioning those skills from experienced workforce to the new students, that either students or educators can kind of take from here and apply in their own classrooms to get people to that head start?
Sure. I think the message I would have is that varied experience with the hands-on real-world experience. So, a little plug for our company. We have our 1,500 different certified education robot, training providers that, these are universities, training colleges that certify in our programs in robotics, right? So great. I get my certification in robots, but is that school also partnering with a local manufacturer? Meaning that local manufacturers are partnering with those schools to then co-op those students in training and actually on manufacturing floor operations and actually working on actual projects. I think the companies that I've seen do really well in growing their skill sets is partnering with local universities, local colleges, local schools, and onboarding, people in leadership development programs, cross-training, cross-function programs, right? You'll see people move every 6 months to different groups and different divisions, working in different aspects of the job. So I might be a controls engineer, but wow, I'm taking 6 months in supply chain. That kind of well-rounded knowledge of from all the cross-training I could get while I'm in a program, maybe learning just about controls, gives me something to think about when I'm going to be coming. It gives me something to think about in terms of when I'm implementing solutions. I might be thinking about cost. It's not just about, man, that's important to a company, right? It's not just about the right solution. It's one that's cost effective. Getting trained in all those aspects of deploying automation, not just that thing. Now you want to master whatever is your core specialty, but all that extra domain knowledge around automation in general, I think that's critical. And I see a lot of companies who've done really well. Some companies have deployed 200% more automation in 2 years. And they have something common is they have partnered with local universities, training facilities, training organizations to partner with them. They've developed training trucks like semi-trailers with training systems, right? And those companies have developed that with these education organizations to basically take the future in their own hands. I'm going to train my own future workforce, and hey, I may have manufacturing facilities in small locations, or non-urban populations, right? Well, I'm going to train that workforce myself, and that's some of the benefits you get from working with me as your future possible employer. Is I'm going to give you great skill sets that are going to be with you for the rest of your life. So that's something I've seen some companies do to, in terms of closing that gap themselves directly.
So I guess there's an encouragement to the companies themselves. Pick up the phone and call the dean of the workforce department at your local college or university, or probably in many cases even high school, and start that communication process. And I know, coming from an education background where I used to teach in one of those CERT programs that you mentioned. And so looking at it from the education side, And trying to work with companies and reach out to companies is only half of the equation. And it takes the companies also reaching out to the educational institutions. Like you said, they're the ones that understand the challenges, and therefore they're the ones that can help to present the best solutions to those challenges. So that's just a word of encouragement to the companies.
Absolutely. And if it's, wow, where do I start? You can start with, okay, another plug for us, but you could start with us directly. We have made such an investment in this market over the last 10 plus years because, I don't know the number of statistics about how many more universities, training, colleges, programs that our programs are now offered in, and the tens of millions of dollars that we've subsidized to educate that future workforce. That, what there would be to do if you were a mom and pop shop or a large organization. Hey, I'd like to tap into that. You could contact us direct, and we'll directly put you in contact with the deans of those colleges. That is definitely one of the tips I give to any company today. If you have labor shortages, best way to close that gap is put you directly in touch with a pipeline, right? I want to get somebody who's trained in PLCs. I want to get somebody trained in robotics and automation or industrial manufacturing or IoT 4.0, digital manufacturing. There's now courses dedicated for that. A lot of these, little did I know, there's 5, education facilities, colleges, universities, training centers around me. I could get people, but I didn't know that, right? So part of that is people don't know what they don't know. We shed light on that and where you can get that future talent right away.
Keynote speakers and live sessions for Control Automation Day are brought to you by Mouser Electronics. As your design fulfillment distributor, Mouser is your authorized source for millions of components from over 1,200 leading brands. Come discover, design, and develop with us.
Now, from the sound of what you've been talking about so far, your approach to helping companies solve the problem is not to walk in the door and immediately tell them what they need to start doing. You take more of the consultative approach, counseling companies as you work with them. So when companies come to you and say, well, we need this project, we'd like to automate, and obviously they want to see some sort of ROI as soon as possible, what does that look like when you first begin working with one of these companies that's new to automation? Can you kind of walk us through what that process might look like and what they can expect when they give you or a similar consultative someone who can walk them through that process?
Sure. Here's what I recommend it looks like, if I can say it that way, right? Because a lot of times where people are going to start with is a problem to solve, right? So they're going to start with some opportunity. So if I'm the systems integrator or I'm somebody who's going to consult or advise you, what it may look like is great. Let's go look at the challenge. But what I really want to do is I want to be able to see everything. If I look at it like darts, if you give me hey, I need to throw a dart and here's the challenge, and I want you to hit the 20, right? Or hit the bullseye on this one dartboard, then I'm just going to focus on that. But from a consultative standpoint, if you do want to implement, if you already know it, you're the end user, you're the customer, hey, I'd like to implement probably more than just this one system, then I'm going to want to take in consideration all those other things we may not see yet. So little did I know that this first task at hand is the bullseye on this one dartboard, but once we're in the plant or the warehouse floor, we're walking around, as an advisor, we're probably going to uncover and do an automation evaluation and evaluate your manufacturing process or warehousing processes to identify where the low-hanging fruit is. And people who are really experienced, we can look at something and say, yep, that's about $100,000. That's probably, okay, let me watch that for about an hour, and I could probably come up with some ballpark pictures here. And maybe after a few days visiting with you, map out a 2-year strategy and say, the opportunity you first invited us to look at, that's number 3. Here's number 1 and 2 that we uncovered based on these factors of simplicity, low risk, things like that. I might even know that, hey, that process that you like to automate, I know 3 companies who are already providing that solution, right? That's where when you bring in people like myself, these industry people, we've seen a lot, right? So more so than just maybe what you may have on hand. So we supplement what your automation staff, the knowledge, the experience that they have. And a lot of times we supplement it with a very wide, vast variety of knowledge and experience and seeing things that have happened before. A lot of times that's where I see my value today has shifted from 20 years ago, somebody who's a great problem solver, to somebody who has seen so many things done. And I know I can point you in the right direction to where this is done already, right? Let me lessen that risk by working with companies who have already solved that challenge. So that process may look like, hey, come on in. I'd like you to quote this, but be open to, in addition to quoting that, hey, you bring in a systems integrator, have them walk around, get their thoughts, third-party input on what other low-hanging fruit they may see, other challenges that they may know about. Because I only also have the in reality, the limited knowledge I know about all the manufacturing processes out there, right? You can identify your manufacturing processes and probably find experts in every single one of those domains, moving material out of palletizing, assembly, and they probably are going to have, 100 times domain knowledge than maybe just your automation engineers that you have on staff today, right? So I think that's my pitch is, in an advisory style, manner, we'll probably look at one opportunity, but we're going to be looking at everything holistically. And is that the right one to start with?
And that sounds to me like something where a company may hear somebody walk in and recommend, well, here's this one project that you want us to quote, but here's several others. And the gut reaction may be, well, no, I don't want to spend, I didn't ask you to come in and quote me other projects. But in reality, success for them in those projects to get them started, the ones that might be that low-hanging fruit, really are also success for you. So everybody ends up being a winner in those cases. And you're not just there to quote extra projects, you're there to ensure that their entire transition through automation is as successful as it possibly can be. And therefore, they're going to come out ahead in the long run.
Absolutely. That's why I said earlier that it's important to still, we still want to tackle, right? So the experience from the solution provider for, hey, you invited me to tackle this one problem is, no, we're still going to tackle that. Here's some other to possibly consider. Let's throw this on the board. At the end of the day, it's kind of like getting my kids to eat vegetables. I'm happy one of my two kids loves vegetables, but the other is like, I know better, but you're the one who's going to have to eat whatever you're going to eat at the end of the day, right? So as best as we can as an advisor, it's kind of like, what can I advise you on your health and what you do? It's still up to you. I can only try and give you as much data. That's what I'm going to try and do as well, and try and give enough data to show here's why it's not me making the decision. It's these factors. It's, wow, projects 1 and 2. We came in to look at a project, I'm going to call it project A, but projects B and C might even be higher on the totem pole because, wow, those factors made the decision for us. So that's one thing we do advise on is don't have us make the decision. Have your tools make the decisions for you. Come up with the criteria you want to utilize for justifying your automation. What's the labor, the scraps, the defect rates, all the typical factors you might see in a spreadsheet. And at the end of the day, let the spreadsheet do your talking for you.
And speaking of that spreadsheet, I guess that kind of speaks to me because as an engineer, sometimes the vague criteria of evaluate and try to decide is sometimes difficult, but give me the spreadsheet, the list, the checklist, and sometimes that makes it easier to process through. Are there worksheets or spreadsheets, checklists that companies can use even before they get that first visit from the integrator or from the consultant where they can go through with their own checklist and start making some of these evaluations? Earlier, you mentioned you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes I imagine getting started, you might not even know what to put on that checklist of evaluation. Do you know of such resources that exist, or can companies reach out to you to get a bit of a checklist to get them started in evaluating their own processes for some of these properties that might be very important to you later on?
Sure. I think there's different companies. Even if you Googled automation checklists, you'll probably come up with different examples, and different things I've seen out there pretty much cover the basics of, great, where's my high scrap rate? Or is there machines that are running 24/7 or 2 shifts? Where do I have my high runners in terms of my high throughput? And then, what does that look like? How many hours of labor are associated with that? And if I look at that, if I were to try and give some numbers of, if I look at my plan, and this may not be, if I look at what I'm going to be armed with before even consulting with somebody like myself, is where are my high throughput runners? How many hours manual labor are associated with that? And what's that dollar amount if I at least save that per year? And if over 2 years, and I'm willing to do a 2-year ROI, right? If I'm within the $125,000 range, a lot of times we can hit that range with solutions that are available today for simple low-hanging fruit. I am talking so general right now. I know there's like so many cases where it's like that's not the case. But if I can think about, can I save at least $100,000, $130,000, $150,000 over 2 years, then we probably have solutions for you. And identify those. For me, coming into a company who's already done some of that work and said, here's our high runners, here's some of our estimates we think that they've already started to do their ROI thinking, return on investment thinking. That's somebody who's already now ROI minded, meaning letting the data speak for where I should be automating. In some senses, if it's quality based, meaning, hey, maybe the factor isn't the amount of labor hours, but these products, I spend maybe 3 hours of labor on making this thing, but it accounts for 80% of the defects for whatever reason we get back, right? Warranty costs. You just want to look for those outliers for where am I spending money a lot, and could automation help me there? Do some of those calculations up front. Because one of the main factors in the spreadsheet I'm going to come in with is going to be looking at the ease of implementation, meaning, is this high risk? Have I seen solutions deployed for this before? That'll come from the knowledge base. So we need somebody who has experience to be able to rate that. But the dollar signs, that is something that those companies, they own that, they know that more so than anybody coming on the outside coming in would know. So preparing those ROI numbers, ROI figures, where do I go for spreadsheets like that? You can Google ROI calculator for robotic automation. You're going to get a bunch there. What are the factors when deciding to implement automation? You'll get a bunch there as well. And then, of course, you can always reach out direct, and we're happy to work with you.
And as you talk about ROI, that is a word certainly that speaks to all companies, but maybe that speaks more to upper management. Engineers often are concerned with the viability of tasks and the day-to-day operations of tasks. And while ROI is certainly important, downtime is critical to solve. The different discussions that happen at those different levels each provide some sort of unique perspective on the challenges in the facility. So when you go in to work with companies, do you generally counsel the upper level management to work with the engineers closely when they're evaluating all of these properties and trying to decide which projects might be the most valuable? Do you encourage that from both directions, engineers to talk to upper level management and give them recommendations, but also talking to upper level management and counseling them to work with the engineering staff to gain feedback on which projects they feel with their experience might be the most logical and reasonable to pursue?
Absolutely. The accounts that we consider that we're going to spend a lot of time with are the ones who do have that engagement, meaning there's some executive sponsor, somebody that at the highest levels are saying, here's my vision I have, I fully authorize this, let's talk. And then they're very open to the on-the-ground data feedback from the engineering levels, the plant floor levels, the maintenance people, the operators even, inputting onto providing input whenever they're maybe assessing automation opportunities. That communication, absolutely critical. And I would say that even though as an engineer, I remember when I've worked with engineers who weren't cost-minded, great solutions. But man, at the end of the day, I spent all this work designing something, and then I go for approval, and then all of a sudden, hey, that's a 5-year ROI. Or why did we design it that way when maybe we could have designed it and utilized this off-the-shelf component that, yes, it doesn't have this extra 3 or 4 features that you would like to have, but it does the job, right? It just makes it for me as an engineer, I'm going to say I love seeing systems I ideated, I brainstormed, mapped it out on a napkin, and then seeing that installed. The more of those that I see, I love that. I still love seeing systems I've deployed out there myself directly. That's fun. So being ROI minded, financially, fiscally minded as an engineer, I think it's a very unique trait. And I think it's something that could set you aside from a lot of your competition out there as well, from your other peers, because I am ROI minded. So I can, if I'm upper management, I want to say, hey, let me go to that person who I know is going to design something great, it's going to be implementable, low risk, and it's probably going to make me money as well. They're going to be in a different category of their own, right? So if you're somebody who that's important to you, then that's definitely a differentiator of being ROI fiscally minded.
Now you've mentioned that a couple of times, that idea of cross-training, making sure that, yes, you might be a great engineer, but you also need to take the time to learn some of those other skills that, they're not just aside from your job. They're not just off to the fringes. That's a pretty key component of being successful in a business, is having that financial mind that can not only see the designs, but can also see the financial returns and understand what that upper level management is even talking about when those discussions start happening.
Yep, absolutely. A lot of times our first people, that we're even negotiating with are technical. Purchasing isn't even involved yet. They're the gatekeepers before even we talk to purchasing, is somebody who's technical. And sometimes, it's great to work with somebody, not sometimes, it's always great to work with somebody who not only is fiscally, minded, but even their expectations are they're fair and valid as well, if that makes sense. So, so it's a great skill set to have. And to me, it has the process go a lot smoother, making sure we're spending our time working on projects that are going to be validated. They're going to be, approved, basically, that it's going to have an easier time approving now up front versus doing all this work, speccing something out 5 months later, then having to see, wow, this is going to take 5 years or 4 years to get a return on investment, longer than I expected, and now I have to spend another 2 months spending this time to then negotiate and figure things out at that point, right? Not to say that's never going to happen, right? It's still going to happen as part of the learning process, and that's just what it looks like for certain projects. But if I can do some of that investigation and ROI analysis assessment up front, it helps the approval process in the future.
And I did mention a little while ago that I wanted to be sure that we cover some first steps that can be taken. And I think our discussion about worksheets, that can be a very tangible first thing that companies can do. But you also just mentioned talking to the different levels of a company. You mentioned operators. And I think I want to question that one just a little bit more, or explore that one a little bit more. How would engineers and upper level management, how do they best use that experience? Sometimes the operators have more experience in how the machine or how the process works than anyone else because they're involved with it all day in their job. What's the best approach for these engineers and management to take when inquiring and working with the operators to gain their feedback on how a process actually works literally sometimes at the nuts and bolts level?
Yeah, it's simple questions. What do you like about this machine or this process? What do you like about your job? What are the parts you hate? What are the parts that give you issues? And a lot of times those general questions you'll uncover, wow, the operator has to walk around the system like 10 times just to make it work. Or, they hate the screens and the menus. They don't, they only use 2 buttons out of this really complex menu. You'll uncover a lot from the operators in terms of their description of the things they like about what they do, the parts that, the challenges, what the difficulties they have with the current machine or the process that they have today. The things that you probably wouldn't be able to find on a spreadsheet or report if you had that from your production. Those are absolutely, golden knowledge to get from them. And then including them in even the teaching of the process, especially art forms like assembly or sanding or painting, welding. The best people we found to be quote unquote programmers or teachers of the robots are the people who are manually doing it themselves. So especially if you're looking at operations that a lot of people know are like a bit of an art form, you want to make sure you include those operators definitely in the process of identifying the solutions, automation solutions.
Well, this has been a lot of really great feedback on how to move from low automation to successful automation projects. But before we're done, I did want to just get your input on addressing sometimes those, we might call them failures, but really often it's more just unforeseen problems and challenges that face a project after it's gotten started. So how do you deal with projects, or how do you recommend companies deal with projects that may have results that they would consider to be less than ideal, and as far as what they were hoping to see as the outcome? Is that a deal breaker for automation? Is it just a small speed bump in the road? How do you usually work with companies that are unsatisfied with how they've gotten started with a process?
Absolutely. 2 things. I'm going through that right now, actually. I can speak to it live, is to get in black and white. What's not functioning to your expectations. Let's put numbers to it, meaning the system was supposed to be running at 15 seconds. It's running at 20-second cycle times, right? Great. Let's get this really specific. That's one thing I can 100% say is before that automation, quote unquote, failure becomes your obstacle to deploying future automation, let's go back and fix it. 100%. I'm very keen on, cleaning up any of the past, mistakes or whatnot. Let's get that get that first system. A lot of times it's the first system too. Get that first one really working well, but get it black and white. And all those failure, quote unquote, whatever you deemed as a failure, list that down, put down the countermeasures, what we need to deploy for that. But first and foremost, before we even get into the countermeasures, just get really specific. What's not working for you about that? Operation wise could be, hey, it's too difficult, or these things happen. I don't know why. Just get those problems down, get the specifics about what's not operating as you'd like it to, and then we'll come in and we, solve that, get that working. The second part is spend as much time as possible up front before you even issue the purchase order to somebody of actually identifying, here's all the things we think might go wrong. Going through the actual, acceptance test. A lot of times you're going to buy automation solution from somebody. I mean, every time you should think about, great, what's the test we're going to do before you even ship that solution to me as the customer? And what does that look like? What do I want to test for? What are all the things that possibly could go wrong? Nobody likes to spend this. Maybe not a lot of people like to spend their time doing this up front before they even get started, but it's something you could do to really, shave off a lot of those headaches in the future. Go through your factory acceptance test, your site acceptance test criteria. Do that up front. Identify those failures. Identify what can go wrong up front. Have it be part of your specification. Now, the other caveat is this. Wow, there's all these bad things that could happen. You also have to think about, do I need to automate catching that? Or maybe I have 3 people doing this process. Maybe I only have 1 person for half a day that does half of these processes, right? So there's a bunch of curveballs in automation. There's not just one single solution, right? So I've identified all these defects or all these things that could go wrong. I may not want to automate all that either. That is a pitfall of, great, automate all this, Mr. Integrator. And all of a sudden my ROI has gone now to, 5 years and beyond. So definitely go back, get black and white. What is the criteria? If I have a system that's not working as well as I'd like, identify that criteria. What should it be working as? And if you don't like the current supplier who'd put that in, there's many others. There are people who are really good at fixing other people's stuff too, right? So that's another possibility. Keep that in mind, right? I always go back to who brought it in first. I always recommend that. Bring the people who did it. They're going to know, they should know best. And if not, there's people who are really good at fixing other people's stuff, right? But get that fixed and then identify as many of, when you're doing a new automation system, identify as much of what can go wrong up front. And do your factory acceptance test and get that really clear what you're expecting somebody to buy off on, as part of this business process.
I suppose it goes back to that old saying that says, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And automation has never been considered easy, but the challenges can be really fun and really rewarding. Now, really quickly before we're done, I just want to take a minute with a little bit more of an informal question for you. And sure. I'm just curious, what was your very first robotic project that you did, whether that was a hobby project, something you did for fun, or whether that was a very first work-related project? I'm just curious, what was your first robotic project that you ever did?
My first robot project was I was installing robots, painting cars. And I love this experience. I got to appreciate what it is to stand for like 12 hours on very uncomfortable grading where you can't sit anywhere. To watching, skilled trades cut down, weld, torch, all this equipment, and then in 2 days put up multi-million-dollar robot systems, to pulling, tubing, to getting your hands dirty, to, just this. It was an awesome experience, my first robot project, because these were large systems. There's so much I remember from that first, as maybe you could tell, even fondly remember being, people being yelled at and what that looked like. There was so much I learned. That's why I talked about one of the first things to do is get hands-on if you can with systems that go in place, because you just see so much of the dynamic of what automation solutions implemented. What is it going to look like at the very end of the day? The human dynamics, what we had to test, all the problem solving and troubleshooting of getting things working and not working, spending 12 hours trying to troubleshoot something just to find out the thing was installed backwards, right? Like all those things you just remember of lessons learned that I could never learn in a textbook. You know what I mean?
Well, this discussion has been excellent. I've really enjoyed talking to you. It really makes me want to go out and do some robot integration. Hopefully, I get the chance one of these days to be able to participate in a project like this. I really thank you for your time. This has been an awesome experience to learn from you, and hopefully, other companies have gained some insight as to what they can do to get started or to continue in their journey of automation, because obviously our goal here is to see success for companies and for individuals who want to see future success in all kinds of automation projects, whether that's robotics or really anywhere else where technology can take them.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. That's what we are here for. Our company is, whether it's an individual, your success, and us helping you see that through, or as a company, your success with deploying automation. That's what we're here for. So thanks for this opportunity.
And thank you to our audience for joining us today for this keynote, sponsored by Mauser Electronics. Once again, our sincerest thanks to Fanuc and to Jerry Perez for sharing his time and experience with us. We hope that you will visit the virtual vendor booths and watch the other keynotes and live session events, all of which will still be available on demand after today, so that you can share the experience with anyone who may have been unable to join us live. Remember, the more sessions you register for today, the better your chances of winning one of our giveaways or becoming the lucky winner of our grand prize of your very own 4-axis robot arm. Thanks for joining us for this Control Automation Day 2024 presentation, and we'll look forward to seeing you again very soon.